hey, there's fear involved, there's anxiety involved, there's, this is my thing, this is my baby, don't call it ugly types of things. So there's lots of things going on there.
So that's the whole podcast. Thank you for joining. That's all topics.
Cue outro music now.
Yeah, right, exactly. Hi, welcome to another episode of Consultants Saying Things. I'm Chris Lockhart. Today I'm joined by Shashi Sharmali, Bill Bensing, Carol Hamilton, and special guest Mike Walker, Mike the Architect Walker. Mike has been blogging about enterprise architecture and architecture in general for, 15 years or so. And I've known Mike through the interwebs over that time. Glad to have you here, Mike. Today I'm hoping we can delve into something that I take very personally, which is sort of the role of architecture, right, in enterprises, especially right now with the ongoing crisis and the ongoing pandemic. Can you introduce yourself quickly? And I kind of want to ask you, the architect, Mike the architect, what is an architect in this context?
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge, right? Everyone kind of has their own theories on what that is and what that isn't, and it ranges from something very tangible to, hey, I'm here to write specs and build models and help people with detailed technical decisions, all the way to the other end of the spectrum around enterprise architects really being a form of management consultancy. Enterprise architects, really being in there to help drive significant business decisions using their technical acumen, using their business acumen, using their, critical thinking and analysis to drive the organization forward. And so that's really where, as far as my background is concerned, that's really where I've focused my career, is more on that other end of the spectrum.
I've been between Fortune 50 and startup. My own company's in Fortune 50. And it's funny because I started an architecture organization thinking enterprise architecture was a solution to a problem. I love where Mike was going with this, because EA is something you do, not something you are. I may have paraphrased at my own words. So Mike, if I'm misrepresenting what you said, just let me know.
No, you're good.
But what I liked it, and I don't know if this is your thought piece, but where we're going with this is like architecture. So it's product person. I'm a software product person. Go from right now CTO, building IoT, AI, and basically becoming the Tesla of moving and storage, which is fun because we're getting into some stuff with Google Coral Dev Board. So it's all tech strategy down to tech implementation. But when I get to it, I look at the EA and I look at the role. And Mike, let me know if this is your thought piece, but Gartner's big term, at least a couple of years ago, was Vanguard Architect. You're smiling at that one. Because the biggest thing I look at EA is I realize is most companies are trying to make that jump, right? They're trying to make that jump from being an IT shop, which is a bunch of ticket takers, technical ticket takers that can't talk to a person, to people driving top line strategy. And it's funny, when I saw EA, went to the last company that stood up the EA organization, that was the whole purpose. Like, hold on a second, we got a lot of ticket takers and we got people who want to talk strategy, but we have nobody to bridge that. So let's bring some folks in our tech strategy. So let's bring some people in, let's build out a competency that can actually talk to people and understand how to drive strategy. And I'm not talking about we need 20% growth. I'm talking about true strategy and tactics and to bring it. Through being out the spectrum, what I've looked at is I've been fighting with the concept of architecture in the past 8 months. I don't believe in architecture anymore. And I make that statement proudly, because coming from it, it's like, hold on a second, engineer, architect, program manager. When you look at the true tech companies, I've been studying a lot of literature from Google, a lot of people that are on the ground. We were talking about Spotify earlier, like from a true tech company, those folks that drive it, they're small product teams that drive product to market. They have all of these skill sets. And so looking at where companies want to day and the people that are going to listen to us want to go is they're probably asking these same questions. And it's like, hold on a second, you don't need a team of architects, you don't need a team of engineers. You need a team of product people. Now the skill sets they need to have these competencies in X, Y, and Z. Architecture is one of them. being able to decompose large problems into smaller things. But yeah, I'll stop right there because I can keep going on this. But at the end of the day, I think I'd almost say, just as I thought the bimodal IT was bullshit, I would almost say EA is dead. But and I so and I love it. I love that you're from a Gartner analyst because I got some of these opinions, but I love the concept of where bimodal came from. But anyways, I'll stop there and stop.
That's fantastic. Because if you go with some of the folks we've had on this podcast who have been writing books about EA enterprise architecture for a couple decades now, EA has been dead and resurrected several times over.
Chris, I don't know how many times I've heard EA is dead, long live EA.
Shashi, I mean, you and I have both been on enterprise architecture engagements, and I'm quite sure that the partners involved in those engagements did not view architecture in the way that it was just described.
So first of all, we have set a new record. This is the first time in last 2-3 years of this podcast history that I'm talking so late in the podcast.
That's true. Normally, that's true. Sorry about that.
So that is good. So my journey with all this architecture thing kind of started back in IBM when I was like 5-6 years experience. They had a course, and they never tagged it as an enterprise architecture. They called it architectural thinking course. Now I understand the meaning of it because you got to think like an architect, right? You got to think like it's not a designation. I mean, anybody could be an architect. You don't like the term enterprise architecture, but Bill, I'm 100% sure you think like an architect, right? So I identify a person or connect with them not based on their designation of being an architect, a person who can think like an architect. That's number one. Second thing is, to me, even the CEO of a company is an enterprise architect, right? He doesn't deal with IT. He doesn't have to deal. So it's one of the functions he deals with. But what he does is he has different pieces of his corporate puzzle. He needs to fit in together to generate value for his shareholders. To me, that is how even a CEO of a company is a chief architect of the company as compared to anything. So these are the 2 points I wanted to make. Third thing to answer Chris's question is from consulting standpoint, enterprise architecture skill set requires a very sharp degree of advisory skills or management consulting skills. Your ability to communicate the value of IT to business, as well as your ability to understand business and help them leverage the power of technology. And this is exactly what we have been doing over the past few years around our enterprise architecture engagement. You don't have to call them an enterprise architect. It's like problem solver, not really solving technical problems. It's basically structuring the problem and going through a methodical way of trying to solve it. And if you add technology side to it, how can you leverage technology to solve some of those business problems? And some of them would be related to people, and some would be related to process.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, right? Because we would always approach it as, what business problem am I solving, right, with this architecture engagement that I'm drafting up? Because, it's always difficult, especially in management consulting, to go in and start talking like an enterprise architect, because a lot of times clients think an enterprise architect is an IT architect, is a technology.
Exactly, yes.
Oh, you're an enterprise architect. You're here to tell me about the systems and the platforms and it's like, no. I'm an enterprise architect. I'm an architect of the business, right? I'm here to help you think through some of these problems that may have a technology component. Now, Carol, you coach CEOs on probably on dealing with consultants in some cases, right?
To Bill and Mike's points, the guy who walks in the door and says, I have the model that you need, is the one who should probably be just walked right out the back as fast as they get there. I like the points that Shashi is bringing up, where you're really talking about how am I helping you think? And am I adding data into that conversation? And the key that data adds in is it gives them something, a way to retell it. What I'm seeing with a lot of these consultants who come in and they're talking to the leaders is they're so busy selling their product instead of thinking about who does this guy have to tell. So if you're my CEO client, Chris, I got to come in here and demonstrate for you what I think and why I think you might want to think that way too. But then I have to give you the words that you can convey to somebody else to sell it, whether it's the board, the shareholders, whoever it is. And I find that, to Shashi's point, so few consultants are really coming in with those management skills saying, who does this guy have to tell on the other end of this? And so I like the whole idea that we're not just thinking about models, we're thinking about leadership. I relate this back in my early days. I was a golf caddy, and I would provide the data. I know I'm a weird human being, but my husband was an aspiring professional golfer, and I'm who he could afford. So that's why things worked out okay, but not great. And so what happened is I would provide him with data and say, here's what you can do. Now, which club are you going to swing with the most confidence? Because that's the right model, that's the right confidence. Because, and to Mike's point earlier, you're the one who might end up in jail over this, so you should really feel good about this. And so I think when we're coming into this, we have to come in with the data that we believe in, we have to come in with the IT that's going to support it, and then absolutely with that management communications piece. How am I telling you, and how are you going to tell the rest of the world?
Now, Carol, I'm gonna poke the bear a little bit here.
Awesome.
And say, so I agree. First and foremost, you have to have the data. So that's why you have the job. That's why you've been invited to the meeting. However, and this is a big however, even if you're the smartest person in the room, even if you have the answer and you have all the data, and if you don't have gravitas when you walk into the room, if you can't command the room, if you can't squelch the noise, if you can't make the executive that you're talking to feel connected with that data that you're presenting them, then, the classic mistake that I've seen with enterprise architects and management consultants in other roles of similar flavors, because they're all very similar flavors, is that the biggest issue is that EQ side. It's, I cannot command a room. I can't get people to be on board. Why won't this guy listen? I got the answer. I'm just giving it to him on a silver platter. And so I think a part of this is, I wrote a post about this a long time ago. I said, IQ get you the job, but EQ lets you keep your job.
Yes.
Right. And so I 100% agree with you. It's about giving them the relevant, impactful data, but also the package in which you're delivering that is so much more important, right? We expect the smart guys and gals to be able to have the data. It's really about the delivery. And I think you would probably agree with that, Carol.
I really do. And EI is one of my favorite topics. I actually was just working with one of my global clients who said that is all they want to talk about going forward, because they feel that their consultant crew, that's the skill that they're missing, that they do understand the data, they do understand the model, and they don't understand how to read the room. They don't understand how to think in terms of what is that client really going through, what's their soft spot going to be, what's their key fear. And then this is a world where we're dealing with fear at a level that nobody's ever seen, because it's the unknown. And if you don't have a concept as to how to manage fear in people and not be afraid of their fear, you're out, or at least you're not as deeply in. So learning how to manage the fear on the other side of the table, I think, is absolutely critical.
So all the way back in 2001, I'm running an enterprise architecture team for this bank, Fifth Third Bank. You guys can look it up on the LinkedIn profile, so I might as well just name the company. So Fifth Third Bank, second, largest EFT provider in the country, seventh largest bank in assets, big deal. And we were rejiggering what enterprise architecture means and doesn't mean for the organization. One of the first books all the way back then that I mandated that my team read was Primal Leadership and 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yep.
And between the two, I've got the emotional intelligence side that says, oh, okay, we've got to look at ourselves and how we're communicating and how other people want to be communicated to, but also the team dynamic. And knowing, I love that story in 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I think it was the CFO, was the smartest guy at the company, but he didn't last when the company went public. He was gone because he pissed everybody off. And so I think there's really important parables there that everyone, any professional can learn, but especially for these more strategic thinkers, enterprise architects, that at the end of the day, we're communicating with people. And what resonates with people? Incentive. So if you want to understand the behavior, if you want to change the behavior, understand what are the incentive drivers and communicate to those. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And Bill was talking last time on our last session, talking about that people were doing these kind of blind layoffs and, flailing about trying to save cash, and that the job of walking in was also to investigate where is the real money being spent and how are you communicating that with your leaders so that they're not just flailing about looking for a solution, but actually sitting down and taking a breath. And to me, that keeps coming back to giving them that, addressing, I know you're scared.
Yeah.
I know you're absolutely terrified, and I know you're leading a team of 200,000, however many people it might be, of really frightened people. Let's start there, and then let's go looking for the solutions.
So far, we have been talking about a perspective when an external person is hired to be an enterprise architecture advisor, right? So there is a whole different world of role of an enterprise architect within the client environment. Like if you're working for Toyota, if you're working for Moody's, some bank, so there is an internal enterprise architecture role. Now you can split that role, and I would love to know your thoughts, Mike and Bill, for you to critique all these three different levels, right? So is enterprise architecture a thought leadership team or an advisor internally within the firm? That's number one. Second is, are they executionists where they deliver something? They should be responsible for delivering something. And third thing is just a governing or an audit body where you would have multiple hundreds of projects running, so they go and they conduct audit and things like that. So those are like different kind of role and where they fit within an organization. Sometimes they are clubbed as part of your PMO. I think that's not correct. Sometimes they are embedded within as part of an IT. Should they be outside IT and should be reporting into probably a chief administrative, chief operating officer instead of IT? So those are some of the questions which are very interesting. Of course, I have an opinion, but would love to know from...
I want to interrupt. Before Mike, you get started, I want to say something, Shashi. I love how you said Bill critiquing Mike. Sometimes I feel like Mike should probably be critiquing me.
Hey, we're equal opportunity critique here. So
Exactly.
You critique me and then I'll critique you. So, here's the interesting part about this. So, I did the count a few months ago because I was asked in an interview about how many enterprise architecture organizations have I talked to when I was specifically at Gartner, because I could actually keep count because I would have inquiry calls, 30 minutes, or I'd be at conferences and sit down with folks. 4,500 enterprise architects in 5 years. That's a lot of architects. And, there were some common patterns.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry. I never mind.
I saw you waving. So
I was doing this. I was doing a lot of this. I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, I know what it was. 4,500 in 5 years, probably at a lot of different levels of competency as well.
Yeah,
and
totally.
And defined differently depending on what org you were talking to.
And I don't like to go back to things like maturity models because I don't believe in maturity models because they're not really business driven and they don't really take into account really what you want to be and what you want to do. It assumes that you want to be the greatest in this particular area, but maybe you don't. So the example that I use is I want to go running and I want to do it every day. One goal could be I want to run a marathon. And that workout is going to look different from, hey, I just need to shed a couple pounds. Or, hey, I used to run in high school and I kind of like it and it kind of de-stresses me and I want to do that. So based on your outcomes, you need to figure out what sort of competencies and capabilities do you need. Now for EA and all that range, if we use a simple construct, I would say on the simpler, less mature side, most of the people I talked to were in that realm. So I would say largely 70 to 80% of that 4,500 were saying, hey, Mike, we've restarted our EA program. How do we do it right? Hey, I'm really struggling. What can I do? I'm trying to sell an executive, whatever it may be in that category. There were very few in the higher end of the spectrum. And because this is hard. It's not very well defined. Same thing like with other roles. We pick on EA, but if you look at CIOs, they got a shelf life of what? 3 years? 4 years? That's even less than an EA, right? If you're going around and you're being the traffic cop, that's the classic mistake. You're going around slapping people on the wrist because they're doing the wrong thing. They didn't follow the right standard. That doesn't work. It doesn't work for other roles and it doesn't work for EAs. I can tell you myself, I've been in that position where I had to chase people down. it's just not a good position to be in. And, you know, when you think about structuring these things to be effective in organizations, yeah, you can go chase people down. And in areas that are highly regulated, you might get away with a lot of it, but you're going to alienate all your colleagues. They're not going to want to work with you. And they're going to like, okay, I know I have to, but I really don't want to. You don't want to be in that position. Enterprise architects and how I've tried to structure my EA teams is about enablement, not enforcement. Okay, so creating a self-governing structure where there is this creative tension in the organization. And how you do this is, you know, I described this as well in another blog entry where I use the analogy of the federal government. Separate EA into three major branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. In each one of those branches, you should have different people. So for the judicial branch, where decisions get made, put the decision makers there. Put the IT leaders, put the business leaders there. Have the chief architect chair that architecture review board or steering committee or whatever you want to call it. The legislative branch that creates the laws or the standards or the best practices, the guiding principles, all that stuff. Elect the experts, the SMEs in the organization. You know, the lead architect for security, the lead architect for this or that, a super great guru developer that knows all about development standards and next-gen UI. You know, bring those people in. And what that does, instead of you now chasing those people down, it's self-enforceable, because if you create the standard, you don't want to go against your own standard. And if you nominate someone that is kind of a thought leader within the organization and really smart and recognized, then other people are going to follow, and it's going to be this herding effect. The executive branch really gets into your first question, Shashi, and what I've observed and what I've done in my EA practices is what it looks like inside companies is we help with the strategic planning side. So we know there's seasonality to all this. So we know if you're in a calendar year and not a strange fiscal year, that, you know, around, you know, October timeframe, everyone starts getting together and saying, hey, what does our next year operations plan look like? And then what does our long range strategy look like? How do we update it? What should we do, et cetera? EAs play a vital role there. They play a vital role in the innovation management process. So that whole Vanguard EA thing that we say is bundled in. A lot of my work today at Microsoft, and I'm not titled as an EA, but I do EA things. I go and talk to business executives. You know, last week I was talking to an executive board of directors at a top, you know, Fortune 10 company, right? About digital transformation and how AI technology, blockchain technology, IoT technology can transform their supply chain. Right. And talking to them in business terms and talking about what innovation can do to their business and create new monetization streams. And so the second part of that, in that third pillar in the executive branch, is really helping foster new ideas. We don't know what we don't know, but we can give you some data that's going to help you figure out what we want to be when we grow up. And then lastly, we know that there's all these, you know, big bets that companies make. Hey, I want to create, I want to be the Airbnb for Hilton. I'm just making this stuff up. I want to, you know, redefine logistics because I want to compete with Amazon. You know, there's going to be big bets that companies are going to make, and they want to de-risk those projects. So they want folks like EAs that can come in and facilitate the decision-making process to make it faster, to make it less risky, but also report back to the executive team and translate what this means and course correct when needed.
First off, in my mind, you're a good EA, a good architect in general, or somebody who has his capabilities, can execute. You know, I always go back and I relate this to myself because what I'm doing right now, but I'm in the back right now building LoRa. If anybody's familiar with LoRa wireless, and Mike, you're probably with that.
Hey, Bill, before we lose the thread,
yeah.
I want to comment on your first comment about founders and EAs and all that, because I think this is it's an important distinction. You know, we talked about before, if there's any consistency, there's inconsistency in the definition of an EA. And some of that's on purpose because strategists and innovators need to be somewhat malleable.
Yeah.
Now, let's put another dimension on this. The size of the company, and based on the size of the company, there are different needs. For a small, you know, I've worked for startups early in my career. It's been a long, long time, but just remembering back, we would never hire a traditional enterprise architect. We wouldn't hire a management consultant to come in unless there was a dramatic need to do so. So
you wouldn't hire an architect either. You
wouldn't
just
hire an architect.
someone who can code. Exactly.
So, when you look at an enterprise architect, just like a lot of these other roles, it's a mashup of different competencies. So if you go to, a great example is the Open Certified Architect certification for EAs. So I'm on the board. I'm a level 3 chief architect, yada, yada, yada. So I go and I interview people, and it's not about what you did, but it's how you did it. So it's based on your competency and what you've delivered. Very much like if you're going to be a doctor, you have to go through a residency and you need to prove that you didn't kill anybody. So, with that, when you go through that, the questions that we ask, we say, you got to have project management skills. You got to have, strategic thinking skills, critical thinking skills. You need to be able to architect from a technical perspective. You need to have all this cocktail of things to be an enterprise architect. The same is true for these founding roles, but I think it's, we're going to take away this and we're going to take away this, and then we're going to have these key technical thought leadership abilities and the ability to execute, business savviness to be able to go in front of investors and to be able to communicate these ideas, et cetera. So I think for us to try to fit an EA into every situation, I think that's a classic mistake that has been made in the past, and that we should just say, look, we don't need this capability right now. When we get to a certain size of company where we do need these extended capabilities, then we bring in an enterprise architect. We grow into it, but we don't necessarily start off with it. Does that make sense, Bill?
It's interesting where you're coming from that one, because actually I wasn't, even though I don't know if I said something along those lines, I actually was thinking differently, because you're right. From the startup, you wouldn't bring an EA in, but I would also, and I'm going to make a very crass term, and this is me exploring the fact that I believe EA is dead. I wouldn't bring an EA into a big company. I'd bring a founder in, only because, and then maybe let me just elicit my perspective here. It's when you think about top line growth and top line revenue generation, it's about value creation. And I don't believe, and I think a bit of where you're going with some of the stuff you're talking about EA is you need somebody here who can drive value creation. And I don't believe the traditional perspective of architects are value drive or creation driven. And it gets back to Shashi, your 3 points. Are they a thought leader? Yes, they need to be a thought leader because they need to be on the front of building knowledge for people. That's what a thought leader is, right? They're building new knowledge for people. You talked about execution. Absolutely. They need to be able to execute. One thing, they need to be able to get hands-on to help explain, because communication, you think about it, reading is a skill that we have to teach ourselves, but we are monkey see, monkey do. We follow what other people follow. We understand by getting hands-on. So absolutely, do they have to be executionists? And third was the governing body aspect. And Mike, this is the funny one. I go back on the different spectrum, but I believe, and I love actually, have you read some of the books on Google's from their site reliability engineering and sort of how they do structure internally? So they have they basically, it's, I'm going to overgeneralize it, but there's a lot of product teams and they sort of operate in and of themselves. And they have some general guidelines and standards for Google, but you operate in of yourself, and Netflix does this too. But then if you want to hand your product off to a central group that manages it, you have to go through sort of a standards and review to get to this thing where you can hand it off, which is a hybrid model of extreme standardization towards a Spotify model, which is extreme destandardization and get stuff to market. So as I'm going through there and thinking about the EA, and this is where I go through the Netflix, the blockbusters, and this is underpinning of my hypotheses these days. A lot of these companies that EAs are consulting for, they're bringing in big consultants, they're blockbuster and they don't freaking know it. And people like me are going to come through and we are going to be the Netflix. The question's when is the good deal. And so that's where I look at EA is really EAs. And I take the founder mentality is if you want to be if you enterprise architect, that's where you come to the founder. But I'll stop right there.
So Bill, I think there's one, so as you were talking, you kept saying architect. You didn't say, you said enterprise architect a couple of times, but you said architect.
Yeah.
Keep in mind when we're describing architects, it's a family of roles. There are enterprise architects. So I usually, whenever I'm in front of a client, I draw a grid. On one axis, because as consultants, we love our 2x2s, right? On one side is breadth, and on the other dimension is depth. Okay. So on the far end, top right-hand corner is your enterprise architect. They're looking across IT. They're looking across the business. They're also looking across industry. So they're looking even outside. Say, hey, we want to be best in customer experience, and we're a bank. Well, are we good at customer experience? Well, classically, no. Why don't we look at Starbucks? They're really great at it. Apple, let's look at Apple, et cetera, and bring those insights in. So they've got that maximum kind of aperture. But the thing is, with that maximum aperture, your ability to execute and make decisions at a very specific detailed level starts to diminish because you've got this broad purview. Your responsibility is to facilitate, bring new knowledge in, et cetera. So that's where other roles start to come in, where you've got domain architects. These are architects with a speciality. So they go deep on very specific areas. IoT, big data, business architecture, information architecture. We can start to list off 20 or 30 different domain architects. But essentially, they go really deep in a speciality. And then your solution architects are the boots on the ground. They're, I think, more of what you were describing, Bill, in that they're with the project teams, or embedded with those project teams, or helping to drive, what standards we should use, not use, et cetera. But I would say the classic mistake that architects have made is where they've been rigid and said, we can't use these standards or we can't use these types of techniques because it's not a standard. That's the wrong answer. Absolute wrong answer. And EAs are moving, and you see the evidence of this, to more product management instead of project or program management. So we see that shift. But just like all these roles, and I would even say for a lot of the companies that I've talked to, let's say a 150-year-old insurance company, they'll never bring in a founder because you're going to piss everybody off. They're going to say, I don't feel comfortable. This guy's going to show me up. I've been here for 30 years. Who are you to tell me how I should do my business? Get the hell out of here. Right? And I've had those very difficult conversations. So they need someone that's in the organization that can bring the organization along the journey. And that's where the people skills come in. If you just bring in a Bill Gates, you bring in a Zuckerberg, you bring in whoever, those are so, and I know Bill G. I've sat with him. He is a very unique person. He drops the F-bomb every third word. He will, at least back then, he doesn't do it now. I haven't met with him for a while now, but back then he has no problem shutting you down and sending you out of the room with some choice words as you're walking out the door. You're not going to get away with that coming into a company. You're going to be like, who the hell is this guy? Right. So I would say the approach needs to be tailored, and absolutely right. Value realization and identification needs to be baked in. And it is baked into, if you look at the competencies of EAs and all these frameworks and such, that's a first-class citizen in those frameworks. Whether or not it's followed or not, that's a different story. And I can't, fix any of that. But as far as the good EAs out there, and there's not a whole, good as let's say the ones that subscribe to how I would define enterprise architecture, there's fewer, but those that are doing it that way, value realization is a core part of it. And we're not going to have a conversation if there isn't some sort of value conversation. So the last point I'll make, and I'll be quiet for a moment, is I think this pandemic is a great example of this. And so when I'm asked by other enterprise architects, what do? I say, drop what you're working on. Just drop it. Go and meet with one-on-one, if you can, or virtually, meet with your business decision makers and say, okay, I understand there's all this stuff going on. I'm probably the last person you want to talk to because you're fighting fires all over the place. However, I've got some skills that may be able to help you. Help me understand where I can help you. Even if you need me to pick up the phone and make phone calls to people, I'll do it. I'm here to help. And don't get all kind of high and mighty and button up your tie and all this stuff and say, well, I'm an EA and I only do this. That's BS. You're there. There's no difference between IT and the business. The business is a construct that we invented in technology. We're all the business. Mm-hmm. And most likely you're a shareholder as well. So you should get off your butt and say, okay, let's do what we can do. Now, if I can use my skill set, my unique skill set to move things forward, fantastic. But if not, I'm here to help us move forward. That's the best thing EAs can do, is to de-risk some of the tactical decisions that are happening right now, and also know this thing's going to come back around in 6 months. So how can we've already messed, we weren't prepared this time. How do we become more prepared for next time and start to have those conversations in the background while not disturbing the mission critical things that need to happen right this second?
One point I want to make, right? I think what you just described it's classic startup type of situation. You might be part of a large corporation. You are in the middle of this whole pandemic thing going on. It's not about what your role is, you're a chief operating officer or a chief financial officer. Everybody has to make sure that the ship is moving in a positive direction. So I
Yeah.
think that's what you're saying. I mean, all the big boys needs to start behaving like kids now.
And I'd like to add that from what I'm seeing in my perspective, there is more humility on that end than there's ever been. So now is the time to make that call and knock on the door, because where you might have been turned away before with "we're too smart, we don't need you," everybody is in this absolute state of "what do you got? I'm listening." And so now would be the time. Right.
And so if you as an enterprise architect or CIO or whatever type of leadership role, if you come in like a bull in a china shop and start to say, I'm all high and mighty and I've got the best picture of what we need to be right now, you've just wrote your death sentence there from a career perspective. But if you come as an enabler, they're going to remember that forever.
Right.
So what you're saying, Mike, it sounds like what I hear you saying is now is the time to do a exhaustive current state analysis and bring forward your framework for how the whole world should work that you worked out alone in a closet for 3 months. Right?
Chris, it needs to be at least 18 months to get this thing done.
Yeah,
18 months, plotter paper, got to get that on order. Yeah, the whole 9 yards.
Maybe like 200-300 slides, you think? That's
at least.
You're killing me.
I'm gonna tell you what, I could probably sell that and make at least 1.5 million off it. So I mean,
no, this is fantastic conversation, guys. And obviously, I mean, we could talk about this forever, right? I mean, it could go on for a long time. I think it's in especially right now, right? Bringing it home for the guy out there on the front line. Doing architecture, right? In air quotes, right? The guy with the title architect, be it an IT architect, a business architect, a domain architect, a solution architect, an application architect, data architect, right? Whatever it is, there are people out there at our clients that are sitting there looking at the crisis that we have going on in the world right now. And I think, very practical advice for how they can, perform their role, or how should they be performing their role or thinking about their role. And I think, to what we've been saying, and everyone has said one version of this, right? It's about enabling the business to survive, one, right? But then also when the crisis abates, right? Is your company positioned, right, to succeed? Or did you cut everything to the bone and fire everybody during the crisis?
Right.
And now you have no capabilities left to go do something. So I think this is good stuff. I appreciate it. Mike, I have one question for you before I want to throw it to the others for their final thoughts here, and then we'll give you the final say. But one question for you. Could you give us your prediction? What will enterprise architecture look like in 2030?
2030. So, I actually agree with you, Bill, on the name. I think the name is challenging. There's a lot of baggage with the name. I hope by 2030 that enterprise architecture will be rebranded into a name that's more applicable instead of the name that was given by John Zachman in 1989. Or 87, one of the two. They go back and forth when he actually wrote his white paper, but that's neither here nor there. But I hope that there is a very clear shift to this is really what we do. We stop with the analogies with physical architecture. It's not about that, right? So that's one thing that I hope the industry evolves to. And that's going to help clear a lot of the baggage as a result. Right now, there's a lot of role unclarity on roles like the CTO and what their role in all this is. And I'll tell you, I did the research at Gartner, and it's a hot mess what these CTOs are doing. Some are highly technical and look over an ERP system, and then while others sit on a board of directors. In T-Mobile in Germany, their CTO sits on the board of directors. So it's all at the other end of the spectrum. And so, we need to figure out where EAs and how EAs start to integrate with those folks. I think EAs should also, thinking about these predictions and, revisiting my 2020 predictions, I think that having a unification of the frameworks, like we see with project management, there's only a few. Same thing with risk management frameworks. There's only a few. There should never be one, but there should be a few to pick from, but not 40. So I'm hoping that the noise gets significantly squelched, and we have a core set of, hey, we've got frameworks that the government has to use because there's laws and regulations. There are things that maybe from a vertical industry perspective that are so special and tailored that we do that, and then there's an all-purpose, general purpose thing that we use like PMBOK and other things out there. So I hope for that, and then lastly, what I hope for, because EAs always are on the back end and they never get any of the credit. I would love to see once by that point in time, an enterprise architect be on CNBC and say, I was the innovator that was able to drive this forward, and this is what I did and how I did it, et cetera. Instead of, a CIO, which is really just a decision maker at the end of the day. They get the data presented to them and then they make a call because they're accountable. They'll get fired if things go wrong. The EAs don't. But I would like to see an enterprise architect actually be able to stand up, not on a stage, but publicly in a press release, in an interview, to be publicly recognized for the innovation that they brought and significant changes to their business model.
Shashi, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
One thing I would like to, emphasize on is I would see enterprise architects being the technology watchdogs, potentially sitting within corporate strategy group of large corporations. And all these companies are heavily impacted by technology, and having a dotted line with their CTO or the CIO, who are the top technology bosses, but their role needs to be elevated and not just focus on day-to-day IT-related stuff, but become more and more business-oriented. That is one thing I would really like to see. And one thing which I picked from our today's conversation is, comparing enterprise architect's role to executive branch, judiciary branch, and then at the last branch what you had. So I would love to use that going forward. Thanks, Mike.
Not a problem.
Bill, what are your thoughts here as you think about the way you've looked at architecture, how it's changing, and any advice you have for a practitioner?
Should I go back to like my underlying just based on it is value creation and value generation. Smaller companies aren't going to hire enterprise architects or architects in general, loosely speaking. They're going to hire basically people that can wear multiple hats. Not that but I think EAs, in my opinion, should be able to wear multiple hats. One, if they do it right, they're going to be the first line against external disruption. And I say disruption as far as other people, our customers are actually going a different direction with the value proposition in theirs. But they'll also be the first line to drive disruption too. And once an organization gets that right, I think they've done architecture well. Because as you think of the core value prop or the core value creation, that's what somebody does, like a founder or something. And that goes back to my hypothesis of EAs need to be founders. And I say loosely because there is a big variation on founders, but it's a mentality there. So I'll stop it there, but I also like the news. Like, I think that's the way that they'll get the news. Mike, to your point, is somebody's going to walk in and be like, this is the X company enterprise architect who, built this product, built this company, built this industry. Once you see established 50 to 80 year companies doing blue ocean strategies, which I'm not sure have happened yet, but I also haven't gone and technically researched it, I will guarantee there'll be an architect that drove that. It's my I'll bet $5 on it now.
That's pretty definitive right there. I'll take that bet. Does that include inflation in 30 years? Is that part of the deal? Or
if somebody comes back in 30 years and I lose that bet, then I'll give them the inflation.
Okay, great, fantastic. Probably in Bitcoin at that point, right? All right.
Exactly.
Carol, what are your thoughts on the architecture, the role, and maybe right now how it's applicable?
Well, as I'm sitting here listening to this conversation, I'm thinking on the one hand, I've got this global big data group, and on the other hand, I've got this military manufacturing group. And the difference in how the EA would communicate is emotional intelligence, because both of them need these roles that Mike has laid out so beautifully. They both and I love the whole 3 branches. I think that adds a structure to it that I have not heard before, that makes more sense and gives more value to it, as opposed to the other part where you think, oh, that's one of those IT geeks and what do they know? Because I think sometimes they get thrown into that box. And the difference between is going to end up being emotional intelligence. Do you know how to adjust for the audience that you're talking to so that they can really see your value? Because that's, I think, the biggest issue is they can't always see it because they don't know how to decipher the message. or it's being delivered in a way that's just putting them off.
There's an opportunity here, right, for companies to actually think about how they've been executing, how they're delivering for their clients, their customers, et cetera. And, architects are central to sort of that thinking process of, what in 3 years or in 2 years or in 10 months, right? What do I want to be doing that is maybe different? Is there anything I can do now in the midst of the crisis that I can prepare myself for when this crisis is over so that I can compete more effectively? And architects and architecture is at the core of that. And I don't mean, right, the architect that knows about the ERP system or the architect that knows about how many MIPS on the mainframe are running, right? That sort of thing. Like I'm talking about an architect from the perspective of the thinker, right? A thinking person, and they can be in different disciplines, right, around the business. But I think right now is just an opportune time if you're a practitioner to be, not doing the exhaustive current state analysis task or the PMO task, right? But like thinking of, where can I help, right? This business can get through weather the crisis, but then compete more effectively when it's over. So, Mike, I'll give you the last thought on this.
We need to figure out what's most important to the company. And that is in terms of value, both benefit in dollars and risk to the company. Because if I'm going to make $1 million off this, but it introduces a significant amount of reputational risk, which I've got an extreme low tolerance for, I'm not doing it. Even if I get 5, 10, 20, $30 million out of it. It's just not there. The value equation doesn't come out. So I use a mechanism called risk-adjusted value. Maybe it's the inner banker in me. I don't know. But it's a tried and true approach that banks have been using for a century. So I figure you can't go too wrong there. So always start with where your business wants to go. And sometimes you got to do a mini ideation session if that's required. Sometimes it's just going and saying, okay, let's revisit your goals over the next year and our long range strategy to make sure we're not going to the current state analysis and documenting a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. That's the last thing you want to do is document the stuff that you don't really need to do anything with right now. So focus on the most important stuff because you're a valuable, precious resource. That's a lot of money for the company. So focus on the things that are going to move the needle for your company. So that's number one. Always start with future state vision, then revisit current state to then assess where the holes and all the bodies are buried, essentially. Second key thing is always be business first. Straight up, yes, technology may get you into the conversation. However, you need to quickly pivot to, okay, so what are the impacts to my business? Think about the regulatory bits, et cetera. Part of thinking as a business person first is bringing those roles organically into your process. So as you're going through your architecture methodology, you should have the lawyers in the room. You should have the auditors in the room. You should have the business decision makers in the room. You should have all these people in the room so that as you're going through the process, they're with you along that journey. They're making those decisions because the last thing you want to do as an architect is make a bunch of decisions. Then when it actually goes to the person that's responsible for it, they say, whoa, time out. Why'd you make that decision? I'm not on board with that. Organically bring them into the process. And that's a classic mistake that architects have made for years, a lot of IT roles where they say there's this brick wall between us and the business, which doesn't exist. I've been trying to find the business for 30 years. I can't find him. I don't know where he's hiding. But it's just another abstraction from getting away from real detail, real things to latch onto. Third, if you're going to be an EA, you better get comfortable being uncomfortable. Okay. So what that means is disrupt yourself. It means, hey, I'm one model that I employed with my EA teams was a rotation. So you were assigned to a division or a line of business for a year. And you would have to build and nurture and foster relationships within that division. And then the next year, you would rotate to another, and you'd have to start all over again. So the idea was you were always on your tippy toes. You weren't getting comfortable and essentially resting on your laurels, but you were forced to be uncomfortable and challenge yourself. Challenge them with diverse thinking because you're bringing the thinking from another line of business that this line of business may not have been thinking. So you're bringing those new insights. Now, over the course of 5 to 10 years, Now you've got an EA team that has deep relationships with everyone in your business. That's really where the payoff is over time. Now because you've delivered value, or hopefully have delivered that value, now you've got all those deep relationships across, and now you've got a really high octane team. And so a lot of this stuff I've got actually on my blog. So I'll insert the proverbial plug here, so www.mikethearchitect.com. That is your definitive source for all things enterprise architecture. Come and visit us today. Okay, so we got that commercial off. But also, one thing that I've started to do with colleagues like yourselves is, I've spun up a podcast as well. And so I invite all of you to join that as well. And one flavor is all around. It's called vNext, and so it's everything innovation, from emerging trends, predictions, specific technologies, et cetera. And the process for innovation management and what that looks like and how that changes. So we just had, the chief architect for blockchain at GE Aviation Digital just record one with us, talking about how they're transforming the aviation marketplace using IoT and blockchain to, significantly streamline that industry, which I had no idea was just so manual and crazy behind the scenes. And I'm kind of glad I didn't know. But also, we're going to revisit the Mike the Architect stuff, and I'm going to actually build out a revisited series. So I built all this content over the past 15 years. I want to understand how well does it hold up? Where can we build on that and do that? So there'll be some rich media in some form for that. So we'll be doing more of that as well.
And where can people find that podcast, Mike?
You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, all the spots.
All the spots. And what is the official title of the podcast?
vNext.
vNext. Fantastic. All right. So guys, thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. Shashi Sharmali, thank you for being here. Bill Bensing, Carol Hamilton, and Mike Walker, thank you. I'm Chris Lockhart. Everyone can go to Google and put in consultants saying things, and you can find all the good stuff. And when you find that YouTube channel, click the bell and get the notifications on when we post our amazing stuff. I think is it over here? It's wherever it is, right? And like us and, all that good stuff. So appreciate it, guys. Thank you all. We'll see you all next time.